ever think we'd see a day when supermarkets would impose buying restrictions on toilet paper? At first, it left the authors mystified as to why toilet paper, but they write, with further thought, the behaviour is largely explainable, that in the uncertainty surrounding a globally spreading virus, not knowing that the next day or week will bring, buying toilet paper is an action that people can take now. It's easily stockpiled, doesn't deteriorate, and is low investment. It sort of makes sense after reading that, Catherine. I kind of wanted to buy a 4-pack myself after reading that.
Well, I accidentally, last weekend I was super busy, and so I thought I'd do the click and collect for New World. And so when I bought the toilet paper, I just sort of realised I'd clicked on the 24-pack one, where I'd normally get like the 6. And I went, oh, bugger, okay, right. So I accidentally stockpiled without intending to.
Guilty.
Yeah. It's a funny one, isn't it, Phil? I mean, I suppose it's a human being thing, isn't it? That at the end of the day, if things all turn to custard, we can still have 5 restful minutes on the toilet having a jolly good think.
Well, or a jolly good panic.
I was going to say, barring the door against the zombies.
What was amazing about this was there was this story about Sydney running out of toilet paper. It enabled me to make off-colour jokes about Australians all week, which is delightful fun and to be recommended. But you can, when I read the article, I could see why they would say that, actually. And I was just on the way down this afternoon, I wandered into the countdown on Lambton Quay just for scientific research purposes to see whether they had any. And the short point was they still do, although they may not after I've announced this, but not every brand. And there was a big gap. So I was thinking, what's going on? How's this?
The nasty sort of thin stuff is left.
Yeah, you can still get chocolate biscuits, though. Pet food, plenty of that. It's just the bog roll. I mean, what's going on there?
So what's your thoughts? What is going on? Why not the chocolate chippy biscuits? Why the toilet paper?
When I read if it was me, I'd take a bottle of whiskey, obviously. But that doesn't go off, does it? But it is, I think, when I read the Guardian article, that's exactly right. It is something you can do. It's an action you can take.
Yeah.
There was a really useful insight in the article to say, and listeners might correct me, but I don't know how much toilet paper I've got at home. I don't know whether I'm down to 1. No. So it's an action I can take. Right, I'll go to the supermarket and buy sort of 24 and I'll know I'm good then. So I think there's a bit of that to it, and the article mentioned that, I thought, very correctly.
We moved to the States in 2000 and my husband discovered Costco, which is like, in bulk, and came back with so many toilet rolls. I don't know how he fit them in the back of the car.
That's right.
And we had to put them in the cupboard under the stairs. It's like completely filled with toilet rolls.
Well, Julia says, Wallace, a tin of baked beans is reasonably cheap and probably of more use than X's toilet paper.
But then you go to the toilet.
Exactly, I'm going to say, sort of cause and effect, really.
Yes. Just on a final note, a couple of texts saying, Phil the book lover, you got thousands of books. What's on your bedside table now?
I'm actually reading a new study of the Dam Busters raid by Max Hastings. A wonderful.
Yes. Yeah.
You're just reminded of just how brave those guys were. They flew across Europe at 100 feet in a Lancaster. Just astounding bravery. So it's an inspirational book to read.
Wow. What about you, Catherine?
I'm actually reading Shakti, which is the latest novel by Rajoshi Chakraborty, which is...
fellow panellist as well.
Yeah. So Raj, and I'm the last person in New Zealand to be reviewing it.
Any
I'm very
good?
slow. Oh, fabulous, yeah.
Yeah, you've both been wonderful. Thank you so much for being with me. Catherine Robinson and Phil O'Reilly, we'll have you back. I appreciate your time today.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much to my producer Laura Dooney, who's done a wonderful job this past fortnight. Checkpoint next. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you at 3:45 Monday. Till then, bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haere nei, a former Dunedin doctor, will spend almost 2 decades behind bars for the murder of teenager Amber Rose Rush. New Zealand's coronavirus count ticks up to 4. The partner of a woman already infected is the latest confirmed case. He was at a concert in Auckland last Friday. So exactly how many direct contacts are being traced and what you need to know if you are headed into a crowd this weekend. Prescription paracetamol will be rationed from Monday after pressure goes on global supplies in the wake of COVID-19. Former Green Party co-leader Jeanette Fitzsimmons is remembered as a woman of unwavering conviction. And the bog of eternal stench that has Wellingtonians gagging. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. Pharmac is putting limits on the amount of government-funded paracetamol patients can get due to shortages caused by the COVID-19 outbreak. The Director of Operations for the government's drug buying agency, Lisa Williams, says factory closures due to quarantines and disruption to shipping lines mean supplies of the common painkiller have dried up. But she says there's no need for people to start panic buying.
We hope that people will act sensibly around this. We're wanting to make sure that there's enough medicine that's available for everybody who needs it, and that's one of the reasons that we've put these temporary limits in place.
Lisa Williams says there is currently enough stock of paracetamol in New Zealand to meet 4 months of normal demand. She says with the coronavirus outbreak, it's inevitable there will be disruptions to drug supplies, and this is just the first. Amber Rose Rush's father has paid tribute to those who have fought for justice for his daughter. The 16-year-old was stabbed to death by then Dunedin Hospital Dr. Bernard Scanther in February 2018 after she threatened to come forward with claims of his sexual assaulting teenagers and young women, supplying minors with alcohol and offering money for sex. The 32-year-old was this afternoon sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 19 years. Ms Rush's father, Shane Rush, says no sentence will ever be enough.
The family would like to just say thank you to the judge and the prosecution and to everybody. We know that the life sentence is not what we would ask for. We would have asked for more, but it is what it is.
Amber Rose Rush's father, Shane Rush. A Shia Islamic centre is closing for a fortnight to ensure it doesn't expose its members to COVID-19. With some members who often travel to Iran, the Islamic Ahlul Bayt Foundation in South Auckland is shutting its doors for at least 2 weeks, or until they're sure it's safe to gather. It's one of the largest Shia Islam centres in Auckland, with about 100 regulars. Sayed Dahami leads Friday prayer, which was called off today.
Right now we have had at least, I think, 2 travellers who have come back recently from Iran. And that was what made us really quickly close the centre, just out of precaution.
Sayed Duhami from an Islamic centre closing because of the coronavirus. The Prime Minister says that Jeanette Fitzsimmons was one of the first guardians of the Green movement and leaves behind a huge legacy. The former Green Party co-leader died suddenly last night, aged 75. Jacinda Ardern says Ms Fitzsimmons was an early voice for action on issues that are now mainstream, like climate change and the deteriorating state of our water and clean energy. She says she was an incredible person who had a kind, caring and compassionate brand of politics.
For her, politics was just one avenue to try and improve the environment that we all enjoy as New Zealanders. And she, I think, really embodied that idea of leaving this place, New Zealand, behind better than she found it, and Jeanette did.
Jacinda Ardern says her thoughts are with Ms Fitzsimmons' family and friends. The local share market ended the week in the red amid heightened concerns about the spread of COVID-19. The benchmark NZX Top 50 index recovered some of its losses but still ended up down 1.8% following a volatile session in the United States and ongoing weakness in Australia and the rest of the major Asian markets. Oil prices also fell due amid concerns that non-OPEC oil producers might not agree to cut their output as global energy demand is weakening. More volatility is expected overnight as the spread of the coronavirus is expected to put more downward pressure on global economic growth. Meanwhile, the dollar is holding steady around 63 US cents and 95.6 Australian. It's 4 minutes past 5. The Crusaders coach Scott Robertson says tonight's Super Rugby clash with the Reds in Christchurch is the perfect place to give big young midfielder Dallas McLeod a debut. The 20-year-old will start at second 5 inside All Black centre Jack Goodhue and outside All Black first 5 Richie Mo'unga. Robertson says the rookie won't need to look far for guidance and he has size on his side.
He is physical, he's big, obviously in stature, and I've got a great skill set. We come through our academy, worked really hard, and it's a great way for him to start, outside Richie and inside Jack.
Scott Robertson. The game kicks off at 7:05 before the Chiefs take on the Waratahs in Wollongong at 9:15. Dame Valerie Adams wants to crack the 19-metre mark for the first time this year at the National Athletics Championships in Christchurch. Adams suffered a rare defeat in her last shot put competition in Auckland, finishing second to Canadian Sarah Mitten, who was also competing in the senior women's event. It starts just after 6 o'clock. Formula One's governing body says it suspected Ferrari's engine wasn't always operating within the rules last year, but it lacked conclusive evidence. With a threat of legal action hanging over the start of the new season, the FIA says it ended a technical investigation by reaching private settlement with the Italian team to avoid lengthy litigation and an uncertain outcome. The season starts in Melbourne next week. That's the news.
Taking COVID-19 seriously.
The solution is aggressive preparedness. This is not a drill.
But containing it requires drastic action.
China used absolutely draconian measures, and it wouldn't be acceptable in other places, and there was obviously a lot of abuse of human rights in that process.
And leading environmental politician Jeanette Fitzsimmons is remembered by those who loved her.
She worked a lot harder than I ever did, and I was totally in awe of her. So she was walking the talk all the time.
Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for Northland, Coromandel Peninsula and Auckland north of Whangaparaoa. Cloudy periods and isolated showers mainly in the east. For the remainder of Auckland from Waikato to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, fine weather apart from a few areas of cloud. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mostly cloudy, occasional light showers, clearing and becoming fine for a time tomorrow afternoon and evening. Wairarapa mostly cloudy tonight, fine breaks increasing tomorrow. Bulla, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine apart from a few areas of cloud. Westland fine until late tomorrow afternoon, then cloud increasing and patchy drizzle developing. Fiordland mainly fine tonight, cloudy tomorrow with drizzle turning to rain in the evening. Otago and Southland mainly fine tonight, cloud increasing tomorrow, scattered rain developing in Southland from late morning. And Chatham Islands fine and cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 5:07.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The sentencing of former Dunedin doctor Vinod Scantha is in a moment, but first, in the past hour, Pharmac has announced that from Monday, patients will face limits on the amount of paracetamol tablets they can access via prescription in the wake of the coronavirus. Although there is currently enough stock to meet 4 months of normal demand, Pharmac's Director of Operations, Lisa Williams, says the manufacturing plant in China has been quarantined, which will inevitably impact supply.
We've been advised that the international manufacturing sites for the active pharmaceutical ingredient, that's a raw material for paracetamol, have been closed due to quarantine or other restrictions connected with COVID-19. And the main site for the raw material for paracetamol is in China. So the restrictions that we've put in place are that an individual could get 100 tablets at each dispensing, or if they have a chronic illness and have had a long history of using paracetamol chronically, they can have 300 tablets per dispensing. This is a global issue affecting all supplies of paracetamol. The main active ingredient, the raw material, is manufactured in China.
And that's Pharmac's Director of Operations, Lisa Williams, and we'll have more on that story coming up. Let's go now to Dunedin, where former doctor Vinod Scantha will spend almost 2 decades behind bars before he's even eligible for parole for the murder of teenager Amber Rose Rush. The 32-year-old was sentenced to life imprisonment in the High Court this afternoon, but as Timothy Brown reports, he maintains his innocence and is already planning an appeal.
I've lost a person who brought our family together. Christmas, birthdays, family gatherings. She was the one who kept us together. I'm completely broken, completely empty. I don't ever leave the house unless it's necessary. I barely eat or sleep.
That's Amber Rose Rush's brother, Jaden Rush, reading the words of his mother, Lisa Ann. Only months after her daughter's murder, Lisa Ann died following a suspected suicide. Vinod Scantha sat silently and emotionless as the words were read, and even appeared to be wearing earplugs. Jayden bravely shared the pain his mother suffered after her daughter's death.
I'm constantly living with nightmares of finding Amber. This never goes away. I'm suffering. There is no normal life. It's an existence. What makes it worse is I'm constantly fearful of the outcome of the court case. I go to court to be there for Amber and my family, but I'm faced with listening to things that no one should have to listen to. To think all I have is a little box of ashes, but still have to go through all this to get justice for my sweet Amber Rose.
Lisa Ann never lived to see the trial, but today brings some semblance of justice to the family. Justice Gerald Nation sentenced Scanther to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 19 years, exercising Section 104 of the Sentencing Act, which deals with the most callous and brutal murders.
What made it callous to a high level was in part the efficient and clinical way in which Amber Rose was killed, but also the non-fatal stab wounds, together with the way you left her on her bed, inevitably in a pool of blood, to be discovered in that way by her mother the following morning. It is hard to imagine a worse scene for a mother to be confronted with.
Scanther stabbed the 16-year-old to death in her bed shortly before midnight on February the 2nd, 2018, to stop her coming forward with claims he was supplying teenagers with alcohol, touching them without consent, and offering money for sex. Those claims would have ended his career. Scanther was already on thin ice with the Southern DHB after showing up to Dunedin Hospital while off duty and after drinking alcohol and treating a patient in 2017. Justice Nation also jailed Scanther for 1 year on each of 4 counts of threatening to kill the prosecution's key witness and his family. Those sentences will be served concurrently. Outside court, Miss Rush's father, Shane Rush, thanked the police, the Crown and the judge, though he acknowledges the sentence will never be enough.
We know that the life sentence is not what we would ask for. We would have asked for more, but it is what it is. So, from all of us, we'd just like to thank the country, and myself and my children will just go on and be strong together.
Detective Senior Sergeant Rob Hanna paid tribute to Miss Rush's family.
We had to endure an unthinkable 2 years, and as the judge said, it's not going to stop now, so the team's just pleased we've been able to try and give them some answers, and just take my hat off to how strong they've been and how supportive they've been to the police. Justice
Nation revealed Scanther maintains his innocence, and his lawyer, Jonathan Eaton QC, has signalled he intends to appeal his convictions. From the High Court at Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Tributes have been flowing for the former Greens co-leader Jeanette Fitzsimmons, who died suddenly last night, aged 75. Ms Fitzsimmons was hospitalised yesterday after falling while out working on the farm. Her husband Harry Park says she then suffered a stroke and died shortly before 10 p.m. She's being remembered as a tireless activist, a steward of New Zealand's Green movement, a woman with unwavering convictions, and who treated everyone with dignity, no matter their politics. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
Jeanette Fitzsimmons' husband, Harry Park, says her death was completely unexpected.
The day before, she was using a chainsaw. That's the sort of person she is. She worked a lot harder than I ever did, and I was totally in awe of her.
Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson says the party is struggling to come to terms with this sudden, devastating loss.
I'm quite heartbroken. I thought we had her for a couple more decades, to be honest. I thought we had her to at least continue to lead us and guide us.
Ms Fitzsimmons became the co-leader of the Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand in 1995. After the first MMP election in 1996, she entered Parliament as a list MP for the Alliance. She won the Coromandel seat for the Greens in 1999, the country's first elected Green MP. There had been hopes of the Greens forming part of the government after the 2002 election, but a row with the Labour Party over genetic modification wrecked any chance of that.
If we'd been prepared to drop our position on genetic engineering, we could have gone into government. But would that really have been the right thing for the party to do? Having campaigned so strongly on the risks of genetic engineering, if we'd said, oh, OK then, never mind. I mean, it's just not what we do.
When Ms Fitzsimmons retired from politics in 2009, she felt there had been little progress in changing the nation's mindset on consumption and sustainability. She made her feelings clear in her valedictory speech.
The planet is full. Its capacity to absorb our wastes and generate our resources is already overstretched. This place on which we pin such hopes as the pinnacle of democracy has proved itself incapable of responding to the crises that threaten to overwhelm us. As an institution, it is asleep.
Former Green MP and close friend Catherine Delahunty says Ms Fitzsimmons' passing has come as a complete shock.
She used to come to yoga with me every Monday night, and I feel deep grief that she won't be there standing beside me.
Ms Delahunty says that Ms Fitzsimmons didn't love the political fray, but stepped up as a leader because it needed to be done. She says her legacy will be her incredible commitment and passion for protecting the environment.
That there are limits to growth, that we live on a finite planet, that we cannot keep growing in the economic sense without trashing the sources of life itself. And she never wavered from the conviction that we actually needed to change the way we viewed economics.
Marama Davidson says Ms Fitzsimmons was ahead of her time, arguing for a well-being approach for decades. She shared a story of time spent together on her farm earlier this year.
She simply said to me, Marama, we cannot fix our planet without looking after our people. And that for me just summed up, I guess, the flagship of the vision that we have as a Green Party.
Ms Fitzsimmons was noted for never raising her voice in the House and never responding to insults from across the floor. Her husband says she strongly believed that cut-and-thrust politics didn't get you anywhere.
All that did was take the focus off the subject that you were talking about, and that your energy needed to be totally on what it was you were trying to achieve.
Ms Delahunty says she had a serene nature and saw the value in all politicians working together.
What real leadership looks like, what real principle looks like, and her legacy is that we do not have to sell out. It is not normal or given that we are abusive to each other in the way we operate.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she was an incredible person and one of the first guardians of environmentalism in New Zealand.
For her, politics was just one avenue to try and improve the environment that we all enjoy as New Zealanders. And she, I think, really embodied that idea of leaving this place, New Zealand, behind better than she found it, and Jeanette did.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
New Zealand's coronavirus count is officially 4, with the husband of an already infected Auckland woman returning a positive test for COVID-19. The couple returned home from northern Italy on February 25th, and today health officials revealed the 41-year-old man was at a Tool concert in Auckland last Friday, and the so-called casual contacts of people near him in the mosh pit are almost impossible to trace, but any risk of infection is low. In a turnaround, the Ministry of Health also announced it will test the grandparent believed to have spread the third confirmed case of coronavirus, after previously saying they would not test that person. Close family members of infected people will now also be offered testing, even if they're not showing signs of infection. The only person hospitalised in New Zealand with coronavirus is said to be getting better, and planning for their discharge is underway. Katie Doyle has the latest.
New Zealand's 4th case of COVID-19 was confirmed today, the husband of the woman diagnosed earlier this week. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the man attended a Tool concert at Auckland's Spark Arena last Friday and was potentially infectious.
He was in the general admission standing area in the front left-hand quadrant. We encourage all people who were in the general admission standing area to be aware of the symptoms of COVID-19. I should add that everybody in New Zealand should be aware of the general symptoms of COVID-19.
But he says people in the standing area at Tool are only considered casual contacts rather than close ones. Dr Bloomfield also took aim at the media today for naming medical centres associated with positive cases.
We do not want the public to be concerned about visiting their general practices for routine visits. We want people who need health care to be able to attend their general practice and not be concerned about attending.
If someone with COVID-19 does visit a centre, those at risk will be contacted proactively by health officials. Dr Bloomfield says other places of concern, like workspaces, may be shared if it helps with the wider public health response.
In cases to date, employers are being advised directly by local public health officials over the appropriate actions they may need to take, and anyone considered a close or casual contact is given appropriate information.
There are 2.5 million medical face masks now on backorder from district health boards, and 18 million in reserve stocks. Dr Bloomfield says it's good that district health boards are taking precautions as COVID-19 continues to spread.
I wouldn't be surprised if they're increasing their reserves and making sure there are reserves. I should say that we have got our own mask producing factory here in New Zealand, and it's underway with and it can produce about 1 million extra masks a month.
The Ministry of Health has also announced it will test the person who it believes spread the third confirmed case of COVID-19. Close family members of the 4 infected patients are also being offered testing, even if they aren't showing signs of the virus. So far, 212 negative tests have been completed, alongside the 4 positive ones. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
Chief Medical Officer Dr Ashley Bloomfield agreed to come on Checkpoint this evening, but after confirming all the details, his office called to say he was no longer available for the planned interview. Meanwhile, another hotel disaster for cruise ship passengers and another nightmare for the Princess Cruises Company. One of its ships is again the source of a potential coronavirus outbreak. The first person to die from the virus in the US was a recent passenger on the Grand Princess cruise ship, and now 21 people on board are showing symptoms. The ship is now being held off San Francisco while tests are carried out on passengers. CNN's Lucy Kavanagh reports.
Tonight, the Air National Guard airlifting coronavirus test kits to a cruise ship off the coast of California.
We have a number of passengers and crew members that have developed symptoms on this cruise.
The Grand Princess was returning from Hawaii. The voyage interrupted by the death of a 71-year-old California man, a coronavirus fatality. Health officials believe he contracted it on the same ship during a cruise to Mexico from February 11th to the 21st. Those on board now stranded. At least 11 passengers and 10 crew members exhibiting symptoms. Less than 100 will be tested for the virus, but thousands may have been exposed.
Is this your first Princess cruise?
It is, yeah, and it will be the last.
Last month, more than 600 cases were reported on the Diamond Princess, quarantined off the coast of Japan. Passengers on the Grand Princess fear they're next.
We're due to go home on Saturday, but obviously we don't know whether we're going to be quarantined for 2 weeks or what's happening.
Thursday, lawmakers on Capitol Hill pressed Trump administration officials for answers on how they'll prevent a similar situation.
We don't want to obviously use one bad example to set the rule for everything else, and that's why we've flown test kits out to the ship literally as we're speaking. That's going out so that we have greater clarity on exactly what we're contending with.
Across the U.S., more than 200 cases of coronavirus reported in 17 states, the brunt of them along the West Coast, with a total of 12 deaths reported, 11 in Washington state and 1 in California. Cases also rising in the East, doubling overnight in New York, largely as a result of increased testing from 11 cases to 22.
The number will continue to go up. It must, because we are continuing to test more and more. The more you test, the higher number you will have.
And that report was put together by Lucy Kavanagh. It is 24 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback if you want to let us know your thoughts on coronavirus, the limits on paracetamol that are coming in on Monday, and some of you are already sharing your thoughts on the death of Jeanette Fitzsimmons. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Drinking games, stripping and nudity from a police senior sergeant. This is what was captured on CCTV cameras the night a male police officer allegedly raped his female colleague in Northland. The man, who can't be identified, has pleaded not guilty to sexual violation and indecent assault. Our court reporter, Annika Smith, filed this story on the third day of his trial in the Auckland District Court.
In February last year, a group of police officers was put up in a Kirikiri motel. They'd been sent to Northland to work during Waitangi commemorations and indulged in a night of drinking before Waitangi Day. This is the setting in which the Crown says a male officer raped a female colleague as she slept. Today, the jury heard from the complainant herself. She said she felt like one of the boys, joking around with her colleagues that night. Her words have been revoiced to protect her identity.
I felt extremely comfortable. You often get thrown into working with different teams of different people at short notice that you might have never met before, and obviously you're in high-risk situations, so you have to be comfortable and trust them straight away.
CCTV footage of the night shows the complainant and defendant plainly comfortable in each other's company. They playfully push and touch one another, at one point walking arm in arm to play a game of touch. The woman said this behaviour wasn't unusual for her, having grown up joking around with her siblings.
We drink, we play sport, we push and shove each other. Blimmin' been tackled by my brother before.
As the night progresses, the group settled to drink in the courtyard. The woman told the jury she'd taken part in a drinking game where officers sculled beer out of a hollowed-out police baton. She said she'd also stripped down to her underwear with others in a game of chicken. The jury watched CCTV footage of these games. At one point, a senior sergeant stands up and exposes himself to the group that laughs hysterically.
A mix of kind of, excuse my language, but what the that's my boss, and he's just dropped his pants randomly, and obviously a lot of hilarity at what had happened.
The woman told the jury the accused groped her in an attempt to come onto her in his unit when she was fetching another beer. She said she pushed him off and returned to the group composed.
He had tried it on with me. I was not interested whatsoever and told him that, not only verbally but physically as well. I thought that was the end of it. I wasn't afraid of him or concerned anything further would happen, so for me I wasn't going to make a big deal about it because I thought it was dealt with.
When everyone went to bed that night, the woman sat outside her unit eating crackers with another male officer. At the same time, the defendant was filmed watching her from behind a police van in the courtyard. The woman cried today as she watched footage that showed the defendant entering her room half an hour after she went to bed. She said she woke from a deep sleep in pain while the man was raping her, telling her to keep quiet. She told the jury she was surrounded by police officers and should have been safe from sexual assault. The man's defence is that the woman was awake at the time and any sexual activity was part of a pre-arranged hookup. Defence lawyer Paul Borich QC has told the jury the case is not one of rape but regret. He will cross-examine the complainant on Monday. At the Auckland District Court, this is Annika Smith.
New Zealand's 6 major banks have announced they will not be participating in tomorrow's Wellington International Pride Parade. The last-minute decision was a collective one made by the bank's umbrella Rainbow Group. The move follows a similar call by several organisations and charities over the past few weeks after concerns were raised about a lack of LGBTQI+ community representation. RNZ's Wellington Issues reporter Harry Locke reports.
Organisers for the capital's Pride Parade say they're expecting more than 2,500 people from 45 different groups to participate in tomorrow's spectacle. But representatives from the country's biggest banks will be absent. They're all jointly represented by the Celebrate Together collective, who, having consulted with the bank's Rainbow staff, decided against participating. The parade's co-chair, Richard Tate, says that's disappointing.
We've got to respect everybody's decision, and I think that's one of the things is when you actually become a large community group, you're going to have lots of representation from either viewpoint, and they've made a decision in the way that they've gone. I mean, I feel disappointed for their members, the people that actually work in the banks, and the fact that they can't come along and celebrate Pride.
The bank's decision to pull out comes nearly 2 weeks after a group of LGBTQI+ organisations, called the Wellington Rainbow Affiliation Towards Hope, announced they would be boycotting the parade. They cited concerns with how the parade was managed, how it excluded rainbow communities, and how it focused too much on corporate involvement. One member of the affiliation, Stephen Mawini, who owns the Ivy Bar, applauds the bank's decision.
We're really happy that the banks have taken the time to consider what we put forward and listen to the concerns of the community and to make a decision that they feel is in line with supporting the greater community as well. It shows really good corporate leadership to show that they're not just concerned about putting their brand on something, they actually want it to mean something.
While the decision was a collective one, the banks have released individual statements in response. ASB said they were disappointed not to be participating, but supported the outcome. BNZ said it was a tough decision and they looked forward to more opportunities to celebrate together. And Kiwi Bank said they understood it was a difficult situation, but they thought it not appropriate to participate. The National Coordinator for Gender Minorities Aotearoa, Ahiwi Hongi, also part of the Wellington Rainbow affiliation, says they hope the move by the banks will improve the Pride Parade long term.
Ultimately, this will hopefully mean that next year's parade, the 2021 parade, will be really inclusive and there will be consultations at the planning stages, and that the rainbow community broadly can have a lot of input into what happens for the 2021 parade.
Stephen Mawini says despite this year's boycott of the Pride Parade, members of the affiliation are keen to keep the event.
We don't want to get rid of the parade. We've always wanted to have the parade, and we do believe there can be a place for corporates, but it's got to be responsible and it's got to be meaningful. And a Pride parade needs to be community first. And if the corporates are there supporting the communities in many ways, then that's good. But at the moment, the way the parade is run, it seems that the corporates are put first before the community.
One of the affiliation's demands is that the Pride Parade holds a public community engagement programme with Rainbow members within the next few months, which the parade organisers have said they're open to. But any changes will have to wait, with this year's Wellington Pride Parade still going ahead tomorrow, albeit with a smaller level of participation than expected. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a Shia Islamic centre closes for at least 2 weeks in an effort to stop coronavirus spreading in its community. A man on trial for human trafficking and slavery says a 9-foot fence around his property was to keep his family safe, not to lock people in. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex step out in London for one of their last official engagements before they step back as senior royals. Get in touch about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And Susanna's standing by with the headlines.
Pharmac limiting the amount of government-funded paracetamol which can be dispensed as from Monday. It says the COVID-19 epidemic has closed the Chinese factories which make the active ingredient. However, a spokesperson says New Zealand has enough stock to cover 4 months of normal demand, and the temporary limits give suppliers time to obtain extra stock. Former Dunedin doctor Bernard Scanther has been sentenced to almost 20 years in jail for the murder of Amber Rose Rush 2 years ago. He killed the 16-year-old after she threatened to come forward with claims of sexual assault, supplying minors with alcohol and offering money for sex. Justice Nation said the murder was callous and carried out in Miss Rush's home, where she should have been safe. Scanther maintains his innocence and his lawyer says he will appeal. A Shia Islamic centre in Auckland is closing for 2 weeks to ensure people are not exposed to the COVID-19 virus. Some members of the Islamic Alul Bayt Foundation have just come back from Iran, one of the worst-hit countries outside China. Sayed Durhami says the closure is a precaution as no one is showing any symptoms. The benchmark NZX Top 50 index has recovered some of its losses, but the local share market still ended up the week down 1.8%. It follows a volatile session in the United States and ongoing weakness in Australia and the rest of the major Asian markets due to the continued spread of the COVID-19 virus. Oil prices also fell due to lower global energy demand, and more volatility is expected overnight. 6 major banks have pulled out of tomorrow's Wellington International Pride Parade after discussions with their Rainbow staff. It comes 2 weeks after the Wellington Rainbow affiliation Towards Hope announced they would boycott it. A spokesperson for Gender Minorities Aotearoa says there can be a place for corporates, but the parade needs to be more inclusive of the community. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time for business news. Nona Peltier joins us in the studio. Hi, Nona. Now, I'm interested in this, new town that's planned at Drury, and it seems that more bits of the puzzle are falling into place. This is Kiwi Properties project, is it? So what's happening?
Yeah, so in 2017, Kiwi Property, which is a very large company, they own Sylvia Park and other big complexes, they purchased quite a large block of, 3 parcels of land in the town of Drury. And so they have about 51 hectares, which is a large 3 pieces of that. One piece that they have an option on, but they paid $40 million initially. And the idea is that they were going to develop it over 20 years. Now, really, the thing is there is a town in Drury, but they want to build a new center town next to it, which is going to have a rail line and transportation hub and all sorts of shops and so forth, as well as a big residential development. So that's a multi-billion-dollar aspiration. And today, the government announced that they're going to invest $2.5 billion towards infrastructure, which will include a rail and transportation hub at Drury, which is going to connect in with all of that from South Auckland all through into the city. So big plans in store for that part of the country. I'm sure it's going to be somewhat controversial, though, because it incorporates a lot of really lush agricultural land, which some people are very concerned about being built into urbanized.
And there's been a lot of conflict and competition for that land between the need for housing and growing vegetables, basically.
Exactly it. So I suppose if there's going to be a period of consultation once the plan is now finalized, and probably by the end of this year, and then there's going to be like a notification. Auckland Council are going to talk to communities and so on. They'll be able to provide their input into it. What Kiwi Property would like to do is break ground and start developing in about 2 years. It will be about 10 years before a community is finally established there in the new parts of the town.
Okay. Now, we've been watching the markets, you have, day in and day out. Another bit of a, upsy-downsy, was it today?
Well, more like a wild ride, I'd say. Sorry. Excuse me.
Coughing into your elbow for anyone who's not watching. She's doing coronavirus protocols.
Yes, indeed. So what we had was... so we're just
I think we need someone to bring Nona a glass of water.
I think I need a bit of water,
if possible.
Yes. So what happened overnight was the markets in the U.S. really went down quite a lot. Partly because of...
Hang on a minute. No, shall we wait for your water to come? And I'll take this opportunity right now to tell you, after we finish with Nona, if you haven't had your fill of business, what you can do is go to the podcast, which is 2 cents worth. And this week it's Peter Griffin, who, he makes an attempt to sell his drone and finds out about the battle brewing between Trade Me and Facebook Marketplace. And that's available all the usual places where you get your podcasts. And while I've been giving them a little bit of a plug, Nona is back, having had a drink, just like magic.
I went and ran out the door and got some water, and I feel much better now. Thank you very much. So the International Air Travel Association came out overnight and said that basically the cost to the aviation industry, this is the coronavirus, the cost of the disruption, is about $113 billion US. Now, that's about half of the value of New Zealand's whole economic the size of our economy.
That is really
massive.
Puts it in perspective. Yep.
So that sent the market into a tailspin of not surprising. No aviation pun intended there. But really plunged. So shocking day on the markets. In fact, it was the worst that we've seen this past week since 2008. Has really lost a lot of value in the U.S. market. There's a lot of concern in Europe and in North America about the spread of the virus. It seems to be spreading just now into the communities. Companies are worried about their, staffing levels, how to manage through all of that. It's a big problem, and it's certainly been reflected in the stock. We didn't do too badly, though. And I think that's partly because we're somewhat insulated from that at the moment. We're not seeing the same spread of the virus as some, that we're seeing in Europe and the United States.
And even in Australia.
And in Australia, too. So we're somewhat sheltered from that at the moment. That could change. And so we didn't do too badly. At the end of the day, We fell 1.8%, but we were down more than 2 and about 2.5% at the open, which was, pretty substantial. So that's a bit better than what we've seen in Australia as well. Overall, the markets in Asia really reflect what we've seen in the United States, and the futures look just as weak. So you can expect a lot more volatility as we get through the day. So let's see. What other things can I tell you? Yeah, and U.S. crude oil prices also dropped about 1/3%. And there's some real concern there. The OPEC nations have got together and said they were going to restrict the flow so as to keep the prices from bottoming out. No one wants to see that again. Well, some people might want to see it, but certainly the industries don't want to see it. But then there's the non-OPEC countries. There's some question about whether or not they're going to honor that. So that puts some volatility into the oil sector. So pretty much every part of the market is volatile at the moment. And it's anybody's guess where we're going to end up tomorrow, the next day. Certainly overnight, we can expect to see the U.S. markets take another hit. Certainly the futures are pointing to that.
Okay, so our numbers at the end of the day?
All right, so we finished down 1.8%. And again, that sounds like a big number, but it could have been much worse. That's 215 points down to 11,426. The dollar is trading at 63.1 U.S. cents, 95.6 Australian and 48.7 British pence. The currency is holding steady because the US dollar has been taking quite a hit. And that's partly because the market is pricing in another rate cut by the US Federal Reserve. The one that they did earlier this week in a surprise move really had hardly any impact whatsoever. It was sort of like, oh, that's good. And then, no, we don't think so.
Yeah.
So as long as the coronavirus continues to spread, I think we can probably expect to see this kind of volatility on a daily basis.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with our business news. A Samoan chief on trial for human trafficking and slavery says a 9-foot fence around his property was to keep his family safe from the mongrel mob, not to lock people in. 65-year-old Hastings man Joseph Matamata, who denies 24 charges of human trafficking and slavery over a 26-year period, today gave evidence in the High Court in Napier as the defence opened its case. Anusha Bradley was there and she filed this report.
Over the past 4 weeks, the Crown has argued that Joseph Matamata brought 13 people to New Zealand, made them work long hours without pay, and beat them if they did not do their work or their chores at home properly. All 13 complainants have told the court they were not allowed to leave his property without permission and were kept locked behind a large fence surrounding his home. Today was the first time the accused could give his side of the story. He said he built the fence after being threatened by the mongrel mob, and his Samoan visitors didn't understand he lived in a dangerous part of Hastings.
But the thing is, they come and live with me. That's my responsibility. That's my responsibility to look after them. I don't demand them like a slave. No, that's not.
He also denied beating a 15-year-old Samoan girl in 1995 and tying her hands with rope on a return trip to Hastings after she fled to Auckland.
There's no rope or any of those things. I had no rope at all. They just went and got her and they walked with her, and I was still in the car. I just popped out from the door and just looked at her. Well, come on, get inside. And then we all got into the car and we just start driving back home. Back to Hastings.
So was there protest by her that she did not want to go, or did she just jump in the car?
She just jumping with shocking. I'm sure she was shocking. She didn't ever know she's going to get caught.
The accused described arriving in New Zealand in 1976 for a better life, but still having to perform his chiefly duties in Samoa. He said his relatives were always asking for money.
I'm a high chief. They're thinking I'm a rich man come from New Zealand. Because every time they always look at me. This is nature. This is a human nature in Samoa. Because they look at me, I'm like a Pākehā, rich man. But I'm not. I'm just a poor man.
His lawyer, Roger Phillip, told the jury the case could not be understood without examining the Samoan concepts of duty, honour, service and family, and especially the role of matai, or chief, which Mr Matamata held.
It's further important in my submission to you to stand back and examine the burden and the obligation of matai, a role of service and to the family, a provider, a a judge over family disputes, a father over an extended family which extends beyond actual bloodlines. His or her responsibility is to weigh all the individual's welfare with the common good and the common need.
Roger Phillip again urged the jury to keep an open mind until the end of the case. The trial will continue on Monday. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
Let's head offshore now. The Russian and Turkish presidents have agreed to create a new ceasefire in Syria after months of heavy fighting that has displaced nearly 1 million people. The truce will take effect from midnight in Syria on Friday, with President Vladimir Putin saying he hoped it would end the humanitarian crisis. The ABC's Eric Torchek reports.
With more than 1 million Syrian refugees huddled against its southern border, Turkey's engineered a new migrant crisis on the edge of Europe. Syrian refugee Fatima is one of thousands of people stuck on the border with Greece. All we hope for now is to go back to our country, she says. We don't want to be humiliated and embarrassed like this. We don't want Europe or Turkey. We don't want anything. We just want to go back home. With armoured vehicles patrolling the border and riot police standing behind newly unrolled razor wire, Greece says it's blocked 35,000 people since Turkey opened its crossings last week. The Greek government is promising to deport any new asylum seekers who've snuck through and is not processing new refugee applications. Turkey abandoned its deal with the European Union to block irregular migration after 33 Turkish soldiers were killed in Syria's Idlib province last week, possibly by a Russian airstrike. Russian President Vladimir Putin met his Turkish counterpart Tayyip Erdogan in Moscow, telling him the deaths were a mistake. I would like to express once again my sincere condolences in relation to the deaths of your servicemen in Syria, he says. Unfortunately, no one, including the Syrian army, knew the Turkish soldiers' location. Turkey's been asking for help to stop the Syrian government and Russia from retaking the border province of Idlib from rebel and jihadist groups, because more than 3 million civilians are trapped there, a third of whom are already displaced by the fighting and waiting at Turkey's border. Mr. Erdogan says Russia agreed to create a secure zone on the front line in Idlib and run joint patrols, with a ceasefire starting at midnight. Our goal is to prevent the worsening of the humanitarian crisis in the region, he says. We will work together to supply aid for all the Syrians in need, without any precondition and discrimination. But Turkey still wants European governments to act in Syria and on refugees, banking on their fear of a new migrant crisis. It's effectively trapping asylum seekers on the border with Greece until the EU steps in. The president of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, Francesco Rocca, says the situation is unacceptable.
It's very, very sad that we have seen again human beings treated as a political weapon, as a tool for politics.
But European politics were changed significantly by the last migrant crisis, and who knows how much suffering Europe's new policies of hard hearts and hard borders can withstand.
And that was Eric Torchek reporting. Turkey wants more help from Europe in dealing with the situation in Idlib. Frustrated by what it deems Western indifference, Turkey opened its borders so refugees could head for Europe. That triggered an exodus that's overwhelming parts of Greece. CNN's Phil Black reports from the island of Lesbos.
These people are cold, exhausted and deeply relieved. They're all Afghan, mostly families and children travelling alone, who recently crossed that stretch of water from Turkey in a small boat during the night.
It's scary, very scary. People are shouting, water is up and down.
That danger is behind them, but their suffering doesn't end on this shoreline. This is where most migrants on Lesbos must stay, the now sprawling Moria camp. Designed for a touch over 2,000 people, the current population is 18,000. Most live among olive trees in handmade shelters without running water, sanitation, electricity. It's a slum. It's your child? Baby? It is no place for a newborn. No place for 3-week-old Adrian to start his life. Moria no good, they chant. The migrants want out of the camp and off the island to catch a ferry to mainland Greece. The police won't let them. They're especially fired up. There's a rumour a few migrants were allowed to board a ferry to Athens the day before. When clubs fail to calm them, the police try words.
This is fake, my friend, fake. Nobody left. We have three, my friend, three friends. Good. Hold the cameraman, please.
Just go. So, this is the friction on the island of Lesbos. On one hand, the migrants who hate where they live, who say that Moria is not good. And then on the other hand, the authorities, the people of Lesbos, who believe their quality of life has suffered unduly because of all of this, and they just want it to end. After 5 years and hundreds of thousands of migrants arriving on Lesbos and nearby islands, Greek frustration is turning violent as well. This UN facility was torched on Sunday night. Aid workers say they're now frequently targeted by angry locals because they're helping the migrants.
There have been intimidating acts, violent acts against humanitarian workers, against refugees that are arriving on the shores, but also against journalists.
We hear about a gathering on a dark, empty patch of land by the coast road where migrants walk to and from the camp. There we find a plainclothes police officer watching dozens of local people. Some carry sticks, cover their faces, and scream furiously at us not to come near them. Cars have been attacked.
Yes, a lot of cars have been attacked.
This man, who only gives his name as Tony and insists on staying hidden, tells us the meeting is for people who are worried about the situation on the island. I mean the violence against the NGOs and the aid workers. Is that okay?
I think it's not.
But you know some
We're all humans.
You know some people do it?
Maybe some people do.
There is tension everywhere on Lesbos, among Greeks who feel abandoned and trapped in an endless crisis they didn't create. And with the many migrants living in squalor, hopelessly watching ferries come and go every day. All want the same thing, a chance at a better future.
Phil Black with that report. It is 9 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government remains divided over the second tranche of gun reforms, and New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters can't say when agreement might be reached. That means any hope Labour had of passing legislation in time for the March 15th one-year anniversary is now lost. While there was near unanimous support for the banning of certain weapons and parts in the immediate aftermath of the Christchurch mosque attacks, there is increasing divisions between parties, including the coalition partners, on what shape the latest changes should take. Here's our political reporter Joe Moyer.
Police Minister Stuart Nash says he wouldn't describe the hold-up as New Zealand First stalling. And while Labour would have liked the bill passed by March the 15th, Mr Nash says that's not the priority.
That's not the important thing. The important thing is we get an arms bill and a piece of arms legislation that is transformation and that meets our requirements. But, you know, we're working very hard, keeping in mind the Select Committee made a lot of changes as well. I have to incorporate those into SOPs. So there's change that has to be done before we get the right bill. And I think getting it right is more important than getting it done to a certain date.
In April, a law making most semi-automatic firearms illegal passed with near-unanimous political support in the wake of the mosque attacks that left 51 people dead. The National Party joined forces with the government back then. However, Parliament is once again divided on the second tranche, with the opposition pulling its support. That means Mr Nash has to rely on New Zealand First to get it through. The bill includes a firearms registry, harsher penalties and a warning flag system around a fit and proper person test. New Zealand First is still negotiating 3 areas: an independent arms agency, rights for farmers dealing with pest control and exemptions for sporting shooters. Mr Peters says no agreement has been reached.
Well, the fact is we're having constructive talks with the Minister of Police. And these are still ongoing, as I understand it, from my latest briefing. I don't know when they'll be resolved, but we are in a positive way going forward to ensure that everybody's in the same space and everybody's happy with the outcome.
Mr Peters says the one-year anniversary of the attacks isn't part of his party's thinking.
We are driving things to make sure that we've got a satisfactory resolution. That's what's paramount in our mind.
And if New Zealand First doesn't get its way, will it pull support for the bill?
We don't deal with hypotheticals, we deal with facts.
It's a fact that you may vote against it, is that correct?
We don't go into a serious purpose on the view that we might fail. Our job is to make sure we succeed in the best interest of the country and indeed, dare I say it, the government.
The National Party's police spokesperson, Brett Hudson, says the opposition detailed 13 bottom lines for their support, but only 2 have been dealt with.
We'll have to see to what extent whether or not New Zealand First and Labour have concocted some series of amendments, but I have put in a number now that will deal with the outstanding issues, and if the government is prepared to support those, then they will have met the requirements we set out.
Mr Hudson says the government has the numbers to get the bill across the line, but that relies on New Zealand First demands being met. Meaning once again, New Zealand First and its leader Mr Peters have Labour backed into a corner. And with an election just 6 months away, the clock is already ticking on getting the legislation passed. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have stepped out in London for one of their last official engagements before they step back as senior royals. It was Meghan's first official royal duty since the couple made their shock announcement about quitting royal life. The BBC's Nicholas Witchell reports.
Lights, lots of them. Cameras, lots of them. But when it comes to action of the formal royal variety, there won't be much more of it from these two. This was the first public appearance by Meghan in this country for 2 months since she and Harry announced their new direction, and one of the last by the couple before they begin their new life in North America. They were at the Mansion House in London for the Endeavour Awards for service personnel and looking by all accounts very relaxed. It's the kind of royal duty, recognising achievement over adversity, that's expected of the royal family. The kind of thing for which Harry, with his own military background, has a natural affinity. Both appeared on stage, Meghan to present one award.
Good evening, everybody. It's very nice to be back.
And Harry to speak about the experience of serving.
For some, the military community represents a brotherhood or sisterhood that no other organisation can provide. And for others, it's a way of life which you never want to leave. For a lot of us, it's both. Being able to serve Queen and country is something that we're all rightly proud of, and it never leaves us.
It was a powerful speech. Harry sounded motivated and fulfilled. Puzzling that in a few days he and Meghan will step away to return to Canada.
Now, here's a story about abduction, forced return, torture and a campaign of intimidation. There are accusations made against the billionaire ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Mohammed Al Maktoum, by his former wife, and they've been established as fact, published in a series of judgments by Britain's High Court. The judge says the Sheikh continues to deprive their 2 daughters of their liberty. The BBC's Frank Gardner reports.
She is Princess Haya of Jordan. He is Sheikh Mohammed Al Maktoum, ruler of Dubai. Now dark details are emerging about what's alleged to have been going on behind palace walls. Here at the Royal Courts of Justice, Princess Haya is alleging intimidation by the Sheikh after discovering the alleged fate of 2 of his daughters. She says he told her, "You will never be safe in England." This court case is lifting the lid on what's alleged to have been going on in one of the most secretive ruling families of the Middle East. Allegations that include the forced return of 2 princesses, one of whom was allegedly seized right here in Britain. Dubai matters. It's a global destination and, as part of the United Arab Emirates, a close Western ally. RAF warplanes use its airbase. David Cameron visited as Prime Minister, and Sheikh Mohammed is a huge figure in the horse racing world. The Queen paid a royal visit to the UAE in 2010. But then there's this.
I'm making this video because it could be the last video I make.
Sheikha Latifa, one of Sheikh Mohammed's daughters, fled Dubai and her family by boat 2 years ago. She was recaptured off the Indian coast by armed commandos. An official statement said she was now safe with her family, but she's hardly been seen since. Princess Haya, a former Olympic equestrian, is said to have since discovered disturbing details about what happened to her and another princess after both failed in their bid to leave Dubai's ruling family. Princess Haya's accusations include that they were both subject to the continuing deprivation of liberty in Dubai and serious physical abuse amounting to torture or inhuman and degrading treatment, and also that their father is using his connections in the press to generate hostile stories aimed at destabilizing and harming Princess Haya. These details have been emerging in court after Princess Haya fled to Britain last year, telling friends she was in fear of her life.
That's Frank Gardner reporting, and before 6, some feedback on the unexpected death of Jeanette Fitzsimmons. A mighty tree has fallen. May memory of the deeds, trunk, roots and crown, which lay now upon the forest floor, be legacy that feeds the next giants. That from someone who just signs themselves MJB of Wellington. We will be back after the 6 o'clock news with more on Pharmac rationing paracetamol. Those regulations come in from Monday, and we'll have the latest details on COVID-19.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. Pharmac is restricting the amount of funded paracetamol patients can get due to shortages caused by the COVID-19 outbreak. The government drug buying agency warns it's inevitable there will be disruptions to other medicine supplies. Ruth Hill reports.
Pharmac's Director of Operations, Lisa Williams, says temporary limits on paracetamol prescriptions will come into effect on Monday. Pharmac calculates there is enough stock in New Zealand to meet 4 months of normal demand. Ms Williams says the limits won't apply to paracetamol that can be bought over the counter without a prescription. But she says it's important to control supplies to ensure everyone who needs the funded drug can get it. She says with the outbreak of COVID-19, it's inevitable there will be disruptions to drug supplies, and paracetamol is just the first. Ko Ruth Hill tēnei.
Bernard Scanther will spend at least 19 years behind bars for the murder of 16-year-old Amber Rose Rush. The 32-year-old was sentenced in Dunedin this afternoon to life imprisonment and won't be eligible for parole until 2037. Timothy Brown was in court.
Bernard Scanther killed Amber Rose Rush to stop her coming forward with claims of sexual assault, supplying minors with alcohol and offering money for sex. After her murder, he also threatened to kill the prosecution's key witness and his family to cover up the crimes. Justice Nation told Scanther the murder was callous and carried out in the teenager's home, where she should have been safe. Scanther was also jailed for 1 year for each of the threatening to kill charges, sentences which will be served concurrently. He will appeal against the convictions. In the High Court at Dunedin, Timothy Brown.
A woman who is in self-isolation after being on the same flight as a person later confirmed to have COVID-19 says it's a weird experience. The woman found out she was on the plane to Palmerston North via a phone alert. She says she contacted Air New Zealand and was eventually deemed to be at risk. She says she's keeping busy in isolation at home.
I've got remote access into my work and I've got a mobile phone, so lots of people have been phoning me. So people have been fantastic. I've had cakes and flowers. People have offered to bring me toilet paper.
The woman says there was initially some confusion about whether she was at risk, which needs to be ironed out. A police officer whose colleague is accused of raping her has given emotional evidence in court today. The man, who can't be named, is on trial in the Auckland District Court after pleading not guilty to sexual violation and indecent assault. Annika Smith reports.
The man is accused of raping his colleague while they were working in Northland during Waitangi commemorations last year. The complainant cried in court today as she described waking up from a deep sleep in pain as the man raped her. The woman said she was surrounded by police colleagues in other units and should have been safe from sexual assault. She told the jury she knew the process involved in reporting it, but went ahead anyway because what happened to her was wrong. The trial continues. Ko Annika Smith, tēnei.
Wellington Water has assured residents on the city's southern coast that a smell that left them gagging on Monday was a once-off. The contractor says 2 mechanical failures at the sludge treatment plant at the southern landfill led to overflows that would have created an odour. One failure caused a skip in the loading bay to overflow, and another caused a spill inside a building, which meant roller doors were left up for ventilation. The Chief Executive, Colin Crampton, says a vacuum truck was on site to hoover up the overflow, which wasn't a common problem.
It's a failure of a particular piece of plant, which occurs very infrequently, but when it does happen, it's designed to be contained on site, and so we can clean it all up and dispose of it without any risk to any person.
Colin Crampton from Wellington Water. It's 6:04. 10-time national shot put champion Tom Walsh is hoping rival Jacko Gill lines up at the national championships tonight so the two can get some good competition against each other. Walsh concedes he hasn't been at his best in recent events in New Zealand and puts part of the reason down to the postponement of this month's World Indoor Championships, where he was going to defend his title. However, he feels not having Gill competing because of injury has also played a part and is hoping he will throw tonight.
Jacko, I think, doesn't probably get the kudos he deserves. You know, him and I have been in the last 3 World Championships finals together, which is a hell of a feat for a country like New Zealand to have 2 guys in the top 8 in the world last 3 finals. So he's getting better and better every year, and, you know, any competition he brings to the table is good.
Shot putter Tom Walsh. At half-time in the Sunwolves relocated Super Rugby game against the Brumbies in Wollongong, the Brumbies were leading 21-7. In the second game of the doubleheader, the Chiefs will try to secure their first away win over the Waratahs since 2007. The match kicks off at 9:15. In Christchurch, second 5 Dallas McLeod will make his Super Rugby debut for the Crusaders in the midfield alongside Jack Goodhue, who'll be making his 50th appearance for the defending champions against the Reds. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life checks out the Taranaki Community Rugby Trust, which runs 3 farms to support grassroots rugby with grass-fed cow's milk. Paul Kelly and Michael Kiwanuka are this week's Friday Night Live acts. And because the 60th Golden Shares are on in Masterton this weekend, we've got a Sonic Tonic dedicated to wool on Nights. Always good for a yarn. After the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for Northland, Coromandel Peninsula and Auckland, north of Whangaparaoa. Cloudy periods and isolated showers, mainly in the east. For the remainder of Auckland, from Waikato to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine weather, apart from a few areas of cloud. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mostly cloudy and occasional light showers, clearing and becoming fine for a time tomorrow afternoon and evening. Wairarapa mostly cloudy tonight, fine breaks increasing tomorrow. Bulla, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine weather apart from a few areas of cloud. Westland, fine until late tomorrow afternoon, then cloud increasing and patchy drizzle developing. Fiordland, mainly fine today, cloud increasing, or cloud tomorrow with drizzle turning to rain in the evening. Otago and Southland, mainly fine tonight, cloud increasing tomorrow and scattered rain developing in Southland from late morning. Chatham Islands, fine and cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's coming up to 6:07.
Thanks, Susanna, and thank you for joining us. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Patients face rationing of subsidised paracetamol from Monday due to international shortages related to COVID-19. Pharmac says it's inevitable there will be more disruptions to other drug supplies with factories and supply chains cut off. Our reporter Charlotte Cook spoke with its Director of Operations, Lisa Williams.
Pharmac is placing temporary dispensing limits on government-funded paracetamol from next Monday. That means that we're reducing the amount that can be dispensed per patient and putting in place monthly dispensing for funded paracetamol.
And why have you had to do this?
So we've been advised that the international manufacturing sites for the active pharmaceutical ingredient, that's a raw material for paracetamol, have been closed due to quarantine or other restrictions connected with COVID-19. And the main site for the raw material for paracetamol is in China.
So supply chain disruption, a lot of things coming out of China.
we've seen medical supplies or protective equipment be caught up in these potential shortages, and this is another one to the list.
Yeah, that's right. We said earlier in the week that with the outbreak, it's inevitable that there's going to be disruptions to supply chains. And the first one that we're seeing of that in the medicine space is paracetamol. But it's really important to say that we do have 4 months worth of normal demand of this product in New Zealand. And the reason we're taking these steps is to ensure that we can carefully manage that stock to make sure that all New Zealanders who need funded paracetamol over the coming months will have access to it.
What other alternatives are there to paracetamol?
Well, there's a lot of other pain management products that are funded, so there's no restrictions on those, but paracetamol is a really good product, and that's why it is an item that is used by many people in New Zealand. Over 365 million funded tablets are used every year.
What kind of rationing or limits will there be?
So the restrictions that we've put in place are that an individual could get 100 tablets at each dispensing, or if they have a chronic illness and have had a long history of using paracetamol chronically, they can have 300 tablets per dispensing.
Is there anywhere else that you can get this raw material from, or is it the global production spot?
So this is a global issue affecting all suppliers of paracetamol. The main active ingredient, the raw material, is manufactured in China.
Well, the raw ingredient that we're talking about, is that in other medicines?
It can be in some other medicines. It's in combination products with codeine or other painkillers, yes.
So is that going to have a flow-on effect?
Yeah, so look, as I said, it's inevitable that there will be disruptions to supply chains. The one that we're aware of right now is paracetamol. We're in close contact with all of our suppliers, and at the moment they're telling us that they've got good contingency plans in place, but we may have to put other temporary restrictions on other products. But at this stage, all we're doing is paracetamol.
What are the other products that are likely to have problems?
I don't have any view as to any other products right now. What I'm saying is it's inevitable that there will be disruptions across the supply chain. So we're actively monitoring all products to make sure that where we need to take steps to ensure that all New Zealanders can access the medicines they need. We'll put in place appropriate measures to ensure that will happen.
Oh, how long are the restrictions going to be in place for?
Yeah, so we don't have any visibility about how long the restrictions will be in place, but we are maintaining close contact with the supplier, and as soon as we're aware that production is back up and running and the supply chain is working, we'll look to remove those restrictions as soon as we can.
And that was Pharmac's Director of Operations, Lisa Williams. Meanwhile, a Shia Islamic centre is closing for at least 2 weeks in an effort to stop coronavirus spreading in its community. Other gatherings and public events are largely going ahead, but with an increased focus on hygiene. This comes after the 4th person confirmed with coronavirus here had been to a concert at Auckland's Spark Arena last Friday when he may have been contagious. Events say they're keeping a close eye on the spread of the virus, but at this stage, the risk isn't large enough to pull the plug. Jordan Bond reports.
With members who often travel to Iran, the Islamic Alul Bayt Foundation in South Auckland is shutting its doors for at least 2 weeks. It's one of the largest Shia Islam centres in Auckland with about 100 regulars. Syed Dirhami leads Friday prayer, which was called off today.
Right now we have had at least, I think, 2 travellers who have come back recently from Iran. And that was what made us really quickly close the centre, just out of precaution.
That person hasn't shown any symptoms, but it was too close for comfort, and they'll only reopen when they're happy there's no risk to their members. Other mosques were open for Friday prayer today, but we're asking anyone who's sick or has recently travelled to a hotspot to stay home. Hygiene at large events is now in the spotlight after the Ministry of Health said one of the confirmed cases went to a concert for rock band Tool at Auckland's Spark Arena last Friday. Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says public events should still go ahead. People just have to be sensible.
If anyone is symptomatic with an influenza-like illness or a cold, then they should not attend those events because that is the best way to protect others. The second is for people attending those events, please do look at the advice on our website around attending mass gatherings, and please do just follow those basic hygiene precautions, particularly the hand washing.
This weekend, the New Zealand Ironman in Taupo and the country's largest fun run round the bays in Auckland are going ahead as normal. Music and Art Festival WOMAD in Taranaki next weekend is too, but it's lost one of its artists who can't travel from South Korea due to the government's travel restrictions. There's one event that won't be going ahead, mostly because other people need them, the GPs conference next month. The Royal New Zealand College of GPs says it's important family doctors and other health professionals stay where they're needed most, at work. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says good hygiene is not just for you, it's for everyone, especially those with compromised immune systems.
While a vast majority of people who may have COVID-19 will only ever experience mild to moderate symptoms, there are those who are vulnerable or have underlying health concerns where the impacts will be greater.
So, her advice?
Wash your hands, stay home if you're sick.
The Ministry of Health says for anyone that was at the Tool concert, there's a low risk of any transmission, but be vigilant and aware of the symptoms. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
The coronavirus is continuing to spread, and in dozens of countries it's affecting almost every aspect of public life. UNESCO says 300 million children have missed school because of closures. The tourism industry is taking a major hit across Europe, Asia and the Middle East. Museums and parks are closed, sporting events cancelled, and several governments are urging their citizens not to travel at all. The World Health Organization says all countries need to act fast and have robust processes in place to contain and control the spread of the disease. CNN's Christiane Amanpour reports.
The bridge that leads to the epicentre of China's coronavirus outbreak, it is nearly empty. Traffic in and out of Hubei province remains restricted. On the other side of the Yangtze River, some residents remain wary of those coming across.
I'm afraid that the people from Hubei province will come over like people I don't know. If they're people I've known, it doesn't matter. People I don't know are not allowed to come into my store.
Across China, where more than 3,000 people have died from the virus, the rate of new infections is continuing to slow. But in other Asian countries, like Japan, it's getting worse, prompting China's President Xi Jinping to postpone his much-anticipated visit to Tokyo.
The task at hand for both countries is to contain the spread of new coronavirus. There is a need to prioritise this.
South Korea remains one of the worst affected countries in Asia. Amid a shortage of face masks, the government is banning their export now and restricting how many each customer can buy at home.
We will limit the number of purchases to 2 masks per week. We know it's not enough, and even this is not guaranteed.
Korea's main airline is now spraying disinfectant through its planes, while other countries like Australia close their borders to South Korean travellers.
We believe that affords the best protection and will enable us to, as has always been our objective, to slow down the rate of transmission.
In the Middle East, Iran remains the worst affected country with more than 100 coronavirus-related deaths. For a second week in a row, Friday prayers have been cancelled in major cities. Schools have been shut down, and authorities here are also spraying public places with disinfectant. The government, though, is urging calm.
Of course, I don't want to minimise the issue, but let's not make it too big. It will not be in the country for long, and then it will fall apart.
In Europe, there's been a marked acceleration in the spread of the virus in many countries, notably in Switzerland and Germany. Most cases can be traced back to the outbreak in Italy, where schools and universities remain closed as authorities try to curb its spread even further. As governments across the world scramble to put into place countermeasures for the virus, many businesses are already counting the cost. Airlines say falling passenger numbers could result in the industry taking a $100 billion plus hit.
This would be a revenue shock
equivalent to what was seen in the global financial crisis.
Even Hollywood is affected. The latest James Bond film, due to be released in April, has been postponed until the end of the year, amid concerns the outbreak could affect ticket sales.
And that was Christiane Amanpour reporting. It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A spill at a sludge treatment plant in Wellington has left residents downwind gagging on the smell. Wellington Water says 2 mechanical failures at the treatment plant at the southern landfill led to overflows which would have created an odour. But the contractor has brushed off comments from residents that the stench is lingering and a solution is yet to be found. Rachel Thomas has the story.
Angela Wilson has lived on Happy Valley Road near the southern landfill for 5 years. Recently, a smell has woken her up at night.
It's like a fresh poo in your lounge, in your hallway. It's that smell of fresh poop.
She describes it as a bog of eternal stench coming from the southern landfill, where slurry, a byproduct of the sewage treatment process, is being treated. It's been trucked overground from Moa Point since January after 2 pipes underneath Mount Albert failed. A report from the contractor, Veolia, says 2 mechanical failures at the sludge treatment plant led to overflows. Wellington Water Chief Executive Colin Crampton says this was what would have caused an odour.
It's a failure of a particular piece of plant, which occurs very infrequently, but when it does happen, it's designed to be contained on site. And so we can clean it all up and dispose of it without any risk to any person.
The trucks have been going every 6 minutes or 120 round trips each day for the past 6 weeks. Orfeto Bay's Eugene Doyle says the smell is compounding frustrations about faecal contamination in the Orfeto Stream and Marine Reserve.
What we've noticed since the pipe failure and the turd taxis started rolling, that foul, pestilential smell has popped up regularly. The people of Orfeto Bay are completely sick of being subjected to the tsunami of faecal matter everywhere we turn.
But Colin Crampton is adamant a spill on March 2nd was the only time a mechanical failure had happened at the plant since the trucking began. He says the doors went up to let the stench out, and a vacuum truck was on site to hoover up the sludge and challenge residents' claims that there was still a persistent smell.
There's no particular reason why that should be. They would have definitely experienced it on the day when we opened the door, but once everything was cleaned up and put back into normal operation, there should be no odour.
Angela Wilson says despite this, she still gags on occasion when she wakes and, as a cyclist, tries to time her commute so she doesn't get stuck behind a truck.
But what he's saying is my experience is not real because he hasn't got data to back it up and, you know, that's a one-off event from his perspective. But what we are experiencing, what I have noticed, is persistent.
The trucking operation is costing ratepayers $200,000 each week. To the end of February, the bill is $2.7 million. Wellington Water is pushing ahead on plans to lay polyester lining in the failed pipes and repair one, then the other. But there's no time frame on this. In the meantime, the bills keep stacking up, the turd taxis will keep rolling, and Angela Wilson will have to keep holding her breath. For Checkpoint, Rachel Thomas.
Meanwhile, offshore, Turkey and Russia have agreed on a ceasefire in Syria's rebel stronghold of Idlib to set up a secure corridor and conduct joint patrols in a bid to stop further mass displacement of citizens. Nearly 1 million people have fled the region during the past 3 months. Russia and Turkey back opposing sides in Syria's 9-year conflict. And in recent years, they have reached several ceasefire deals over Idlib, which have collapsed. But just before the ceasefire was agreed, there was more shelling, making the situation on the ground even more desperate. The BBC's Orla Guerin reports from Idlib.
Working by flashlight to reclaim the living from the rubble. The target here, inexplicably, a poultry farm, which became a refuge for some of Idlib's displaced. By day, a refuge no more. Just hours before ceasefire talks began in Moscow, This devastation was Russia's handiwork.
Last night, I was slept here. This is my home. Here, when the Russian airport bombed.
This is from the bomb?
Yes. Civilians. We are civilians.
And they were killed as they slept, though the Syrian regime and its Russian backers say they are targeting terrorists. Well, when you take a look around here among the scattered belongings, you can see that this was a home, a place where parents were trying to keep their children safe. Some of the toys are still here, and the dishes are smashed at my feet. What possible justification could there be for bombing a place like this, full of civilians? But in Idlib, this has been happening day in and day out. And there's the sound now of more explosions. We've been hearing bombings in the distance since we arrived. Ahmed tells me it's fine if he dies, but he's worried for his children, who by chance were not here last night. Where do you think you and the children will sleep tonight? I don't know, he says, wondering if anywhere in his broken homeland is safe. Not the local hospital. It's a target, like all medical facilities.
Wound in head.
Here we found victims of the airstrikes, like Qasim, who is 9, as old as Syria's war. I want to be a doctor, he says, to treat patients so they get better and no one dies in Syria or the rest of the world. Will a ceasefire bring an end to the agony here? Or will this merciless, multi-layered war keep doing its very worst?
Orla Guerin reporting. A Southland farmer and imam is part of a road trip from Auckland to Christchurch to talk about Islam and honour those who died in the mosque killings. Reza Abdul-Jabbar owns a dairy farm near Mokotua in Southland and is the imam at the Invercargill Mosque. He's part of a group that set up the Murihiku Islamic Trust to talk about Islam, and they have set out on a Kotahitanga togetherness tour. Reza headed to Christchurch to help the Muslim community after the attacks. He says the trust was born out of those days. Cosmo Kentish Barnes caught up with him on his dairy farm before he left, and he began by asking him about the aftermath of the attacks.
I don't think I'll ever forget that in the rest of my life, and I think I'll go to my grave for that moment and that image that I saw in that week. We have to put the energy onto the right path and into the right people and into the right things that we should do rather than dwelling on the past.
How are the victims' families coping in Christchurch? Are you still in regular contact with them?
Yes, we are, very much so. In fact, and some of the families, the last time I met them about 3 weeks ago, and they are recovering, slowly getting the grip of the life without their husbands, without their wives, without their children, and the wounded are starting to get better. I have been told that some of them have recovered pretty well, whereas others are still going through the ongoing psychological therapy, and others are going into the physio once a week or once a fortnight. So the remnants of that harrowing attacks, I think it will be with us for the rest of our life. So what Murihiku Islamic Trust does, we go around people, we go to the marae, we go with the other like-minded bodies and share our Islamic perspective. And we work with Invercargill City Council, with MSD, with a women's group, with the youth, and we go and give lectures all across the South Island, really.
Have the attacks changed the way you approach Islam and also the way you think about life?
Personally, yes. Personally, to me, it's an absolute yes. Being a Kiwi Muslims, we feel that we have been far too busy in forgetting to build more bridges and being the extensions of Islam, that we need to get out there on the road in our local schools, with the hospitals, with other interfaith groups, our brothers and sisters in the Christian's world, our brothers and sisters that have no faith. So I guess what I want to really highlight here is that we work with everybody that have got the same patience in building this togetherness and campaign on this.
And tomorrow, Reza and his team are holding an event in Wellington in the suburb of Johnsonville before heading on to the top of the South Island and on down to Christchurch. And you can hear the full interview on Country Life on podcast or on radio tonight at 9 and tomorrow at 7. Just enough time for some feedback before we head off on coronavirus. A number of you getting in touch. This person says it would be great to know more about the guy who has COVID-19 and was at Tool. Was he in the mosh pit? I've got some symptoms. Was at Tool in the general admission at the front centre, and after calling the number, obviously the Healthline number, haven't been told to isolate or get tested. If he was in the mosh pit, he has exposed a lot of people. Well, the Ministry of Health says the man was in the front left quadrant in the general admission section of that particular concert and say that casual exposures are at very, very low risk. So I hope that information helps. Another person says the second case of COVID in New Zealand slipped through self-isolation and identification because at the time they returned to New Zealand, Italy wasn't identified as a hotspot. Surely we should be advising anyone who's been anywhere outside of New Zealand to be alert to the possibility of transmitting coronavirus. Travelling on public transport and attending large gatherings should be something to avoid for a couple of weeks after coming home. On the Panadol, this person says, stop scaremongering. Panadol actually reduces the body's natural response to fight viruses, so isn't helpful. It also has side effects, so not something people should be popping like candy. Anyway, another person, Helen, reckons it's time for the Ministry of Health to offer free seasonal flu vaccinations to every New Zealander. Be back on Monday. See you then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Pharmac is warning more medicine shortages are likely due to COVID-19, with limits on funded paracetamol from Monday, just the 1st. The local share market has ended the week down 1.8% amid heightened concerns about the spread of the coronavirus. Former Dunedin doctor Vinod Scantha has been sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Amber Rose Rush. His lawyer says he will appeal. And a Hastings-based Samoan chief, Joseph Matamata, has denied tying up a teenage girl and locking her in a room during his trial in the High Court at Napier. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
If any government thinks that the 2019 budget was the end of what needs to be invested in mental health, they're kidding themselves.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice of creativity.
Yes, you're exactly right.